I'm Lacey Wooten, Director of the Writing Studies Program, and I'm thrilled to welcome all of you to AU, to our Writer as Witness event, and to your college writing classes. The Writing Studies Program faculty are invested in your success as writers and as students, but achieving that success will involve challenging you with new ways of thinking about writing and new ideas that might confuse, perplex, or provoke you. As we heard from the various speakers during the last time you were here together in Bender at Convocation, the challenges we all face go beyond our classrooms. We're living in challenging times, and it's important for all of us to develop the ability to engage with different perspectives constructively and civilly. We Gonna Be All Right fits perfectly with these themes and these needs. Jeff Chang calls us to reflect on and confront our own perspectives and blind spots, and he challenges us to engage with often complex, difficult ideas and points of view. He does all this with emotion, but also with intelligence, rationality, and compassion. You'll have a chance this evening to interact not just with the text, but with the person who created that text. Jeff will talk for a bit, and then we'll have time for Q&A. Writing Studies faculty will come around with microphones so that you can ask questions of our author. Before we do that, I'd like to make a few introductions. First, I must introduce and thank the Writing Studies faculty who make the Writer as Witness program possible. Mike Cavett, Amanda Chautka, Nisha Ann Green, Adam Tamashowski, and Sarah Trembath. So please give them a round of applause. Next, I want to introduce someone who will have a big effect on your academic lives here at AU, the Dean of Undergraduate Education and Vice Provost for Academic Student Services. Jessica Waters is a faculty member in the School of Public Affairs and an adjunct faculty member in the Washington College of Law. In her research, she works with reproductive rights law, including such topics as the reproductive rights of employees who work for religiously affiliated employers and legal issues related to women's decisions about pregnancy and childbirth. Prior to teaching at AU, Dean Waters was a practicing litigator, including criminal defense and reproductive rights. Dean Waters is also an Eagle through and through, having earned her BA and law degree here at AU. Please welcome Dean Jessica Waters.
So we call me a double eagle, right? Hi, everyone. How are you? All right, better. Come on. You've got a rock star on the stage. I want to hear better. All right. I need to echo the sentiments just expressed. The Writing Studies faculty and the faculty members who have worked on this year's book selection and all of the events that have gone over the past few days have been extraordinary. And I hope that it is apparent to each of you at this point that the relationship you will form with your professors in the Writing Studies program will be some of the most important over your time at AU. They're the ones who are teaching you how to write, obviously, but teaching you how to think and teaching you how to engage in civil discourse, particularly around really difficult issues. So please give a round of applause to your Writing Studies faculty. So I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming Jeff Chang for this year's Writer as Witness event. And I think that as we all read this book, it was abundantly clear that this was a story that needs to be told. It is impeccably researched, and it's challenging and painful. There's messages of despair, but there's also messages of redemption and hope and resolve. One of the, I think, most gripping aspects of the book is the visual images that are presented. And one of the most extraordinary visual images for me was the segment where Jeff talked about the police cars driving over Michael Brown's memorial as his mother stood by watching. And as a mother, that destroyed me. And as a human being, that destroyed me. And for me, it is it's echoes of the hate and the bigotry and the racism that we've seen in Charlottesville and across the country over the past, I would say, a few years, but we have to go much longer than that, don't we? But I think one of the most extraordinary parts of this book is even as Jeff was recounting those painful events and forcing us to really think about what was that like for Michael Brown's mother as she watched that, there's also a tremendous message of resolve. And Jeff wrote, every time the memorials were torched or removed, people returned to put them back up again. And I think that's the message of this book. It's this message of resolve. And we see that echo again at the end of the book when you speak of grace, right? And you wrote, I thought very powerfully, we live in serious times in which we need to be roused to the inequity of our neighborhoods, our schools, our metro areas, our justice system, and our culture. Ending resegregation is about understanding the ways we allow ourselves to stop seeing the humanity of others. Think about that. It's stopping seeing the humanity of others. And it's about learning again to look and never stop looking. And I think that's what we are challenged to do tonight. As we talk about this book, but as you continue on your studies at AU and beyond, I think that Jeff Chang has posed the challenge to you, never stop looking. And that includes looking in the mirror, it includes looking at our community, it includes looking at our actions, and it includes, importantly, looking at our resolve. Because what we do in the face of bigotry, in the face of racism, in the face of anti-Semitism, is we resolve to do better. And we resolve to stand together and say that is not us and that is not our community. And I think that's the discussion that we'll have tonight. So with that, I am thrilled to introduce Jeff, who the list of accolades is fairly extraordinary. I wish I had all of these things behind my name. He's a USA Ford Fellow in Literature. He's a winner of the North Star News Prize. He's been named one of 50 visionaries who are changing your world, an Asian Pacific local hero, and in his spare time, he's the executive director for the Stanford University of Diversity in the Arts. So, Jeff, we are thrilled to have you. Thank you for your time, and look forward to your talk and the questions.
Thank you so much to all of you. Thank you, Dean Waters. Thank you, Lacey. Thank you to the entire Writing Studies program. Thanks to all of you for being here. Thanks for reading. This is a lot. Thanks to the honors program folks. This afternoon, I kind of lightweight insulted you at the beginning of my talk there, and then you fired all these questions at me. But I was incredibly appreciative. And actually, I should also say that every time I use lightweight as a verb, my kids just frown. They hate it. But that's what it's going to be, I guess. Thanks all of you for being here tonight. I want to try to talk for a little bit about the book, some of the themes of the book, and then have a conversation with you all. And so the first thing to say is that last year I finished this book and published this book called We Gonna Be All Right, Notes on Race and Resegregation. And yeah, it was titled We Gonna Be All Right on purpose. And after the election, it became a question. Everybody was asking me, are we going to be all right, Jeff? Are we really going to be all right? So the book began with Donald Trump, and it ended with Beyonce. Because there's nothing to say after Beyonce, really. And it's about the ways in which we have resegregated ourselves as a country. And it's a process that's been unfolding over the last half century, in which we have dismantled the structures that we began building to move us towards cultural equity and towards racial justice. Structures that arose from a consensus that we built nationally around the need to have racial justice and cultural equity. And so those structures have been dismantled, and this has brought us into this fraught historical moment. And I have to admit, it's been very difficult for me to be out there talking about a book called We Gonna Be All Right. Every week it seems that there's new evidence that we might not. But if you think about the song, right? If you think about Kendrick's song, he's talking about his struggle. And he's talking about the daily kind of grind that he has to go through. He's talking about the emotions that it raises in him. He's talking about being at the preacher's door, and his knees are getting weak, and his gum might blow. He's full of rage, full of sadness, just full of emotion. And yet out of that, he pulls this lyric, right? If God's got us, that means that you got me, I got you, then we're going to be all right. So against all odds, the chorus is optimistic. It's a leap of faith. It's a leap of imagination. It's a reminder that our imagination can outlast the passing darkness, that it can all take us to a brighter day. And we need that now. We live in dangerous times. We live in a nation that's polarized, that's divided. The culture wars have intensified over the past decade. And in a sense, these culture wars are a struggle over the soul of America, right? Competing narratives. The story of a great America that we're in danger of losing forever versus the story of a hopeful, emerging America, the end of American civilization or the beginning of a great national transformation. And so these cultures have now poured into the streets, and there's been a body count. And so let's start right now by saying that polls show that Americans are more concerned about race relations than at any time since 1992, 25 years ago, the year of the Los Angeles riots. And the previous spike in concern went all the way back to 1965, right? The year of Selma, the year of the peak of the Civil Rights Movement, the year that the Immigration and Nationality Act was passed and that transformed our country demographically, the year, not incidentally, that the National Endowment for the Arts was founded. It was the last year of a national consensus for racial equality and cultural equity. So it's been more than 50 years since a consensus for racial justice and cultural equity. So from 1965 to 1992 to now, we seem caught in a cycle of crisis. And so there's a moment at which the crisis breaks out. There's a reaction to that. There's a backlash to that. There's a sense of exhaustion that then sets in. And then we fall right back into crisis again. And so the question becomes, how do we break out of this cycle of crisis? And that's what I want to try to get at today. I want to talk about the facts of segregation and resegregation, the facts of what we can understand as a half century of culture wars. Now, why is segregation important? It's because where you live plays a significant role in the quality of education and the quality of food available to you, your ability to build wealth, and whether you'll have anything to pass on to the next generation. And so these are the same arguments that have been made for over the past century, most of the past century, and they remain true. And so when we say resegregation, what do we mean? Well, the first thing to note, of course, is that some parts of the U.S. never desegregated. So there's that. But let's also go back to recognize that there was a consensus that segregation was a problem, right? From 1950s to 1960s, there was a consensus that segregation was a problem and that we all owed it to each other. We had a debt to each other to bring about justice. And so Martin Luther King Jr. put it best in his letter from a Birmingham jail. He said, "We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be." In other words, until we all are free, none of us is free. And so again, structures were put in place to desegregate schools, desegregate housing, desegregate the culture. But there's been an effort, sometimes loud and quiet, to dismantle these structures. And now economic and racial inequality has grown again to crisis proportions. Now, it hasn't been all bad. The news hasn't been all bad. Even as we've lost ground in equity, we've gained ground on diversity. We've figured out how to move towards cultural desegregation. And so, hip-hop, right? It's important to remember that hip-hop did not begin as a social movement to change the politics of the U.S. and the world. It began as a group of young people, forgotten, abandoned young people in the inner city who just wanted to figure out a way to have fun. But one of the amazing things about hip-hop and why it's been able to survive and grow over these past 4 decades. This Afro-diasporic culture, this black culture, has been able to spread and grow, is that even as it's grown into a commodity culture, it's retained its closeness to the youth, to the kids in the neighborhood. The kids who transform and change hip-hop every 2 to 4 years, who dress different, talk different, new slang, kids who have to regulate their parents who use the word lightweight. The slang, the clothing, the swagger, all of that is different every 2 to 4 years, right? Because it's not controlled by us post-young people, right? It's controlled by you. And it's mostly people of color, young people of color. And that's profound. And so hip-hop has come to reflect not just young people's desire to escape and have fun and party, but their deepest concerns and desires for justice, for fairness, for inclusion, for change. And what hip-hop did in the 1980s and 1990s was to transform the popular culture, literally. It made it impossible not to depict a U.S. that wasn't mixed up, that doesn't look like you all sitting here right now. And so now, in our popular culture, we celebrate diversity. More specifically, we celebrate the picture of diversity. Diversity is here. By 2023, all Americans under the age of 18 will be minorities. And by 2042, the rest of the country will follow. We'll be a majority-minority nation. And yet, at the same time that we've seen diversity, we've neglected to take care of the question of equity. And that's why we find ourselves a half century after the peak of the civil rights movement in a period of increasing resegregation. And so, what the picture of diversity hides is the fact that all indices show that we had been already moving towards a more divided nation long before Barack Obama was elected, long before Donald Trump was elected. The problem is not with diversity itself. It's with the fact that in so many ways, diversity has become uncoupled from the word equity, the word that it was meant to be paired with. So here are the numbers. One thing that demographers note is that you all are the most diverse generation the U.S. has ever seen, and that's true. But another thing that's less discussed is that your generation has grown up with increasing resegregation. So you're a more diverse generation than ever, but you've grown up more resegregated. The peak of desegregation came in 1989. In 2010, almost 10 years ago, it's gotten worse since then, 80% of Latino and 74% of black K-12 students were attending majority-minority schools. The average white student was attending a school that's 75% white. And that mirrors the fact that the average white lives in a neighborhood that's 77% white. At least 2 times the rate of segregation for all other groups. School segregation reflects housing segregation. And so here in the district, right, we know about the affordable housing crisis, that rents have risen by 45% between 1999 and 2005 alone. That over the years 2000 to 2010, during that decade, DC lost half of all low-income housing, low-income apartments in the district. That we saw the growth of high-rent apartments triple. And this displaces people, right? We look at the word gentrification. It's not big enough to describe what's been going on. It talks about the wealth that's moving into the city, but it disappears the people who have been forced to move. And so they move to the eastern portion of the district, to Prince George's County, to wherever they can go. Right? So gentrification is actually a small part of this larger issue of resegregation. So again, the problem is not with diversity, it's that diversity has become uncoupled from equity. And so what we need to do is to repair, literally, these words. Inequality is not created within a generation. It's a legacy of generations of segregation and a legacy of inattention to trying to attack it. So segregation was and is a product of racism and racial violence. And resegregation is the product of the unfinished project to close inequality, to address the increasing gaps. And so the fact that we've turned away as a nation from addressing racial justice and inequity takes us back to how we got here in the first place. So let's go back and look at DC for a second through music. I like to tell stories about music because it's a way to be able to get at some of these deeper types of issues. So in the mid-1930s, during the height of the Great Depression, there was a Louisiana bluesman named Huddie Ledbetter. Leadbelly was how he was known. He was the son of a sharecropper. And he made the trek north, as so many were during that particular period of the Great Migration, to come north, to come to D.C., to Washington, D.C. Now, at the founding of the District of Columbia, around the turn of the 18th into the 19th century, about 30% of D.C.'s residents were black. At the time, most were slaves, including about half of those who built the White House. And so Huddie Ledbetter, Leadbelly, comes to the district in 1937, and at this time, blacks still lived in segregated neighborhoods. Many were locked out of the ability to buy homes, to get jobs, to build wealth. Leadbelly came to record some of his songs in the north, and he and his wife briefly considered moving here. But what he found was up north was just as segregated as it was down south. And so he wrote a song about it called the Bourgeois Blues, and I want to play a little bit of it for you right now.
Some white folks in Washington, they know just how jungle colored man is nothing just to see him by Lord in the Bridgeport town. Ooh, it's a Bridgeport town. I got the Bridgeport blues, I'm gonna bed and you all around.
So what you see is he's bringing together class and race, right? Some people say it's either class or race. Leadbelly's saying it's both, and it's still that way. It's still both. He's being discriminated and segregated on the basis of class and race.
Me and my sweet wife Marty was standing upstairs. Heard a white man say, I don't want no Negroes up there. He was a Bridgeport man. Woo, living in a Bridgeport town. I got a Bridgeport blues, I'm gonna bed and you all around. This is the home of the brave, the land of the free. I don't want to be mistreated by no bourgeoisie, Lord, in a Bridgeport town. Ooh, it's a Bridgeport town. I got a Bridgeport blues, I'm gonna bed and you all around.
So that's Leadbelly, right? 1937. And after World War II, what we see is the ability of many folks to begin to buy properties in the suburbs. The Federal Housing Administration opens up mortgage loans, guarantees mortgage loans. Highways are built to build up the suburbs. But blacks were, and people of color were largely locked out of receiving loans and to be able to move into these suburbs. Nationally, less than 1% of these mortgage loans went to African Americans and people of color. And so we see in this particular period is the beginnings of white flight from the cities to the suburbs. The government essentially subsidized racial and economic segregation between the city and the suburb. And it's reinforced by private marketing housing practices, housing covenants, right, that prevent owners from selling to, literally, they wrote this into the contract, to Negroes and to Chinese. Now, in turn, the jobs also moved to the suburbs at this particular point. And so between 1950 and 2000, the population in the district decreases from 800,000 to less than 600,000. Now, in the district, the government built urban renewal programs that displaced over 20,000 African Americans. Unemployment and homelessness rose. And so the evening that it was announced that Martin Luther King Jr. had been shot, had been assassinated in Memphis in April of 1968, riots broke out in the district. And these riots have to be understood as related to the 20-plus years that came before it, right, of segregation that's happening in the district. So white flight continues to feed suburban growth at this time. Fairfax County, from 1970, it's less than 500,000 people. In 2020, it'll be projected to be at 1.16 million. Same thing in Prince George's County. And so we get to a point, right, in 1975, where DC is known as Chocolate City. The traditional demographics have reversed at this particular point, and now the city is 70% black. And it's happening all across the country, cities across the country. At this point, nationally, suburbs are 90% white. So 2 decades after Brown versus Board of Education, segregation has a new divide. And so this is George Clinton in Parliament's tribute to CC, Chocolate City, 25 years before President Obama comes into office.
What's happening, CC? They still call it the White House, but that's a temporary condition too. Can you dig it, CC? To each his reach, and if I don't cop, it ain't mine to have. But I'll be reaching for you, 'cause I love you, CC. Right on. There's a lot of chocolate cities around. We've got Newark, we've got Gary. Somebody told me we got LA. Yeah. And we're working on Atlanta. But you're the capital, CC. Get down. Moving in on you. Can't you feel my breath? All up around your neck. Hey, CC. They say
So
you
George
dine
Clinton
and
is
game,
describing
you
a
can't
situation
change.
now where we have segregation between city and suburb, between chocolate cities and vanilla suburbs. Now here's Chuck Brown. If you don't know who he is, you will very soon. Growing up here in the district, he was born and raised. He invented a sound called go-go at the same time that hip-hop was starting up in New York City. And by the 1980s, he made go-go DC's contribution to popular culture.
So tell me why we stop to think about this weather, my dear. This little dream might fade away. There I go, talking out of my head again. Now, baby, won't you come and let us put our 2 hearts together? That would make me strong and brave. Yeah. Look here. About when we are one, I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. Hit it now. When we are one, yeah. We're not afraid. We're not afraid. Do it by yourself. Hit it. Yeah. I love you so much. Oh, that's beautiful. One more time. One more time. When we are one. When we're one. No, we're not afraid. We're not afraid. Is this it now?
So he's a godfather to all the bands in the district, right? And a grandfatherly figure to so many folks. 4 generations of people got to hear and grow up with go-go music. This is a picture of my wife and son in 2001. We got to spend a day with Chuck. Chuck's closely identified with DC, but what's also interesting is his story mirrors what was happening in the district in the 80s, 90s, and the 2000s. Like many folks, he moved out to the suburbs at that particular point. And so the Beltway suburbs began to really diversify at this period. And soon go-go's the sound of not just DC, but the DMV, right? The district, Maryland, and Virginia. So this picture is actually him in front of a Willie's, which was a suburban record outlet at the time. And I think I actually put the song back in here twice, but what I want to say is
Tell me why we stop to think of.
that Chuck died in 2012, and he was buried with his famous fedora, and it was hard at that particular point to not feel like some era had kind of passed. Just a couple of months before that, it was revealed that the black population in DC had dropped below 50%. And the white population had grown by 3 times, by more than a third, over the same decade. Now, perhaps this would be evidence of integration, and that's how some researchers saw it. But in fact, it was just a data point amidst change from one tipping point to another. And so at the same time that this is happening in the suburbs, the foreclosure crisis hits. the working class and the middle class very hard. And inequality is growing very quickly. And those most affected were people of color who had been sold subprime loans at rates much higher than whites. What researchers found was that across this country, the highest rates of foreclosure were in racially integrated neighborhoods. And so the financial crisis actually left us all much more segregated by wealth, by income, and by race. Now, it's very easy, I think, to say we can't do anything about this, to say that these kinds of divisions, they're just what happens with the marketplace. These divisions are their divisions, and we're condemned to live with it. But we can, and we have. What I want to say is that when a natural catastrophe hits, as we saw in Houston, right, we become our best selves. We help each other through the crisis. Officials and elites, they worry that everybody's going to turn to anarchy and looting, but the people don't, because people are too busy trying to come together to work to help to take care of the neediest, to provide food, to provide shelter, to provide comfort. It's like Chuck saying, "When we are one, I'm not afraid." And so why have we yet been so unable to confront this slower, deeper disaster, one that's plagued our nation for its entire existence? This catastrophe and inequality and injustice that leads us back into a crisis in each generation. We have to ask ourselves, how can we choose to live well? How can we choose to live with ourselves? How can we choose to live with each other? How can we move out of this crisis cycle? We don't need to be afraid. We need to move beyond fear. And so this brings us to the work of the late Grace Lee Boggs and her thinking about the idea of revolution. We often think of revolution as something to be won through bloodletting, right? Through war, through the violent seizure of power, the replacing of one group in charge with another. But as Grace put it, the next revolution might be better thought of as advancing humankind to a new stage of consciousness, creativity, and social and political responsibility. So her revolution will require us to move away from new ways to divide and rule, to consign some people to death, and instead pivot all of us towards life, to honor and transform ourselves and our relationships to each other. She insists that we rethink how to live together. And so this raises what may be the most important question of your lifetimes, right up there with the question of climate change, which is the ultimate intersectional issue, right? And that's this question, which is, if we are all minorities, how do we begin to form a new majority? So, we're going to be all right. Started with Donald Trump. It ended with Beyonce. So we're going to end with Beyonce. So you know the story, right? Lemonade is about infidelity. It's about promises broken. It's a journey of one black woman from grief through to redemption. And so when the album came out, we thought, oh yeah, that's Jay, that's Beyonce. It's this sort of high-profile gossip type of thing, right? But if we didn't look at Lemonade through the filter of the gossip pages, but instead through the struggle, this long struggle for equity and justice, what might she be telling us? So Lemonade begins with Beyonce refusing you her gaze. She won't look back at you. She won't allow you to see her. She's in a world of hurt because of the betrayal and the harm done to her. She won't let us look at her. So she moves through the grief, the trauma in stages. First the anger, which is a kind of a release. And then the apathy and the emptiness, the despair, the depression. And we can identify with these emotions, right? These are cathartic feelings, right? She's breaking car windows and surveillance camera windows. She's stirring it up. The baseball bat is called hot sauce, right? But she finally turns away from this cycle of pain and revenge, and she's asking the questions, what is my home? Who and what makes home for me? How do I come home? How do I make a home that can include all those I love, even those who have hurt me? And here's where she begins to return her gaze. Here's where the healing begins. So she attains a deeper understanding of her own place in her family, in her place of origin, in history. And suddenly the story that's been about a solitary broken relationship, it has something deeper and bigger to tell us, right? Her redemption reaches the level of the social, the space where we all might come together, where we can think about how we might mend the ways that we break each other and the ways that we are broken. how we might imagine healing, reimagine history, and dream freedom. So again, what if we thought of Lemonade as a way of thinking about reconciliation and transformative justice, where fixing a relationship gone wrong becomes a metaphor for social transformation? James Baldwin's most revolutionary idea, notes the great intellectual Robin D.G. Kelley, is that love is the ultimate form of agency. Kelley wrote of Baldwin, and he might have wrote this of Beyonce and of Kendrick, that for him, it meant to love ourselves as black people. It meant making love the motivation for making revolution. It meant envisioning a society where everyone is embraced, where there is no oppression, where life is valued, even those who may once have been our oppressors. Kelley says that Baldwin was not arguing that we should turn our cheeks, that we should capitulate, right? Exactly the opposite. He wrote, "To love all is to fight relentlessly to end exploitation and oppression everywhere, even on behalf of those who think they hate us." And so what if we took this as our challenge? Restoring the wholeness of those who have been harmed, transforming our relations to each other to be more expansive and generous and equal and joyful. Could we make this nation, this society, this planet into a home for all? I think these are the questions that we're struggling to figure out everywhere, here in our schools and out in the streets. And so again, we're in this moment where politics feels broken. We have a system that brings us no justice and no peace. We often feel alone, isolated, bound by a hopeless reality. Politics is not rising to meet our ideals. 2/3 of Americans believe that dreamers should not be deported. 2/3 think that the country is divided and heading in the wrong direction. Yet politics continues to push us apart. It continues to be about competition, about advantage, about domination, about a world in which there's no pretense of higher values, only a power and a cycle of harm and revenge, a world segregated and at war. And so in this context, the question is, what does it mean to dream again? What does it mean to imagine a world in which segregation and war are not the answers, but the questions to be resolved? And so here's finally the artist, Ana Teresa Fernandez, on the beach of the border that separates Tijuana from San Diego, and she's asking us about what it means to dream again, to dream of desegregation, to rely upon our powers of imagination to create a better world. This is your time. We need you to address the issues that we have not yet been able to resolve. We need new visions from you, visions that will bring an end to segregation, an end to the culture wars, to replace it with a culture that fosters economic justice and racial justice, along with racial peace. Because when 2042 comes, you're going to be my age, right? You might even be saying lightweight to your kids, and your kids will be looking at you funny. And as a generation, you'll be nearing the peak of your powers. So if there's something that you can all do in your time here at American University and beyond, it would be to start addressing these questions, to try to figure out a way that we can all move forward together out of this bad cycle of crisis, reaction, backlash, complacency, and crisis, just as we were after 1965 and 1992. In this moment of danger and division, the revolution is still out there before us to imagine, to make, and to bring about freedom for all. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Testing.
All right, for the question and answer, we're going to have my colleague Amanda Chautka is going to be for the back section. You're sort of divided right there. I'm going to be covering the front section. And then a lot of you submitted questions via Facebook or Twitter. We've called some of those, and then Professor Trembath is going to be doing those. So we're going to kind of a round robin as we go. So if you would like to ask a question, put your hand up. Amanda, where are you? What? Hi, where are you?
Where is she?
Oh, there she is. She's way back there. All right, so there's Amanda back there. I'm down here. And I'll start with a question down here. We'll go back there and then to our social media. All right, question.
Hi, my name is Will, and I'm a political science major here at AU. And I just want to start off by saying I really appreciated how well written your book was in terms of a lot of the information you're able to provide. I'm a big fan of being able to read arguments that are backed up by evidence, and I really liked how you were able to dedicate 1 or 2 paragraphs of pure statistical data after each argument you made. However, with that in mind, something that surprised me was the lack of statistical data on Asian American minorities throughout your novel, or your book, sorry. Specifically in your What a Time to Be Alive chapter on student protest. But just as a brief example, on your Vanilla Cities and Their Chocolate Suburb chapter on page 79, quote, the foreclosure crisis revealed that high-income blacks were not protected from racist and predatory housing and lending practices, nor were Latino and Asian American home purchases. So, when the crash came, blacks and Latinos were 70% more likely than whites to lose their home to foreclosure. However, you didn't mention the statistic on Asian Americans right there. And that's just one example. And then towards the end of the book, you have a chapter called On the In-Betweeners, Asian Americans, where I was expecting my question to be answered. But after reading it, I didn't really feel like it was. And my question to you is, if your book was based on how all racial or minorities in America, and to illustrate their struggles and inequalities, why was there a lack of statistical data on Asian Americans? Thank you.
Thanks for your question. So I wrote a lot about it pretty extensively in Who We Be, the last book that I had released before this book, We Gonna Be All Right. The data show that the foreclosure crisis resulted in a 66% drop in median income, or median wealth, for Asian Americans. And that's, again, because Asian Americans, particularly immigrants, we think, were targeted for subprime loans in the same kinds of ways that African Americans and Latino people were. And so that data is in that particular book, if you want to go back and check for it, and there's citations for that as well. I think that the larger question is there's a twofold answer to it. One is that there hasn't been a lot of data on Asian Americans. That's an ongoing data problem, statistical problem that I was just meeting with the General Accounting Office the other month, and these are the kinds of things that come up in conversations all the time, that there's still a lack of gathering evidence and information and statistics about Asian Americans, both in the aggregate and as well in terms of each of the different ethnic groups that are within that. And so it's an ongoing type of problem. If we're talking in general about Asian American income, median income, what is true is that Asian Americans have the highest educational attainment rate of all racial groups. What's also true is that Asian Americans, for their education rates, still tend to make less than their white counterparts with similar educational attainment. And beyond that, what we're looking for is more data to track the question of wealth development and how that has proceeded and changed over time. Thanks for your question.
Hi.
Where are you? Sorry.
Up here.
Oh, hi.
Hi, so my question is, you mentioned earlier that you had a short deadline for this book, and I was wondering if you could maybe elaborate on your process of gathering and organizing all the information, like the facts and historical references that you made, like in the book.
Thanks. It was an intense process. I'm a research nerd. I'm kind of a research junkie. I get what's called research ecstasy. I'm a nerd. I'm a nerd for numbers. Whoever brought that up. I was an economics major in college, actually, and so I did spend a lot of time trying to marshal a lot of evidence to support these arguments, and had to do it in a very quick amount of time, very short kind of turnaround on this. I'm lucky enough these days to be able to have research assistants to be able to pull things together, to help me pull things together. But a lot of it is also relying upon folks who have been able to work with the numbers and to do a lot of academic reading. And so that's sort of my process, is just to accumulate, to file, and when it's time to actually turn in the essay, to be able to go through that stuff and pull these things out, and then to footnote copiously. Some of the teachers this morning were telling me to make sure that you all take care of your endnotes and your citation, that you're up on your citation game, that you're real tight with your citation game. I was asked to say that, so I feel like your question was maybe a plant. I'd appreciate that. And the entire Writing Studies program does as well.
This is from Colleen Lloyd from our Facebook page.
Okay.
You may have heard of the racial issues that we've had on our campus. And in your opinion, what do you think our response should be toward it? What can be done?
I have heard a little bit about it. I don't know as much about it as I should. What I think is really important is to affirm community, to constantly reaffirm the values that the community is founded upon, and to put that into practice in teach-in sessions and learning sessions and impromptu gatherings in which folks are talking about the issues. And for folks to practice hard listening, to know when to step up and to step back, to be able to be humble, before stories that haven't been told. When protests happen, and this is part of the argument in the book that I'm making, this is part of the argument that I'm making in the book, that is, these are folks who are breaking silence. These are silences that have been fostered in all kinds of ways, in myriad ways in people's lives, from the time that they were born all the way up through, sometimes for generations. These are silences that sometimes have been persistent in generations. And so protests, in that regard, is an ending of silence. And I think it needs to be kind of heard in that kind of light. And so there are opportunities for us to be able to grow as a community, to reaffirm the foundations that found us, that keep us together, and that also will allow us to be able to persist through these different types of trouble. But the bottom line is that most colleges, most universities have not done a great job of keeping up with the kind of change that's been experienced on the campuses. And so a lot of times I've seen these protests as young people calling out the gap between diversity and equity. And so for those of us who are teachers, those of us who are administrators, we're the ones who need to be doing a lot of that hard listening ourselves, and we need to be thinking actively about what are the kinds of things that we can put into place that we'll be able to maintain as structures that have been dismantled, that could be put back into place so that these kinds of issues arise less often.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's also Will, and I'm an international relations major here at AU. I first wanted to thank you for talking about this subject when in America race relations is such a big issue. You wrote about John Roberts and his famous quote that the way to stop discriminating on the basis of race is to stop discriminating on the basis of race. Mm-hmm. And it somewhat echoes also the Martin Luther King quote, "I look to a day when people will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." And my question is, how do you become a post-racial society when progressive ideology demands that you be put into a collective by race?
That's a really good question. So what we want to get to is a world in which each of us are seen in their full humanity, right? And I think that the ideology and the idea of colorblindness is what we all agree upon. It's why every year when there's Martin Luther King Day, that particular quote from Martin Luther King kind of gets trotted out, that he wants a world in which his children, his grandchildren are seen for the content of their character, not by the color of their skin. But in order for us to get there, we have to recognize that the law has never been colorblind in the U.S., that it's been set up specifically to segregate, that it's rare in history where the law has been set up to desegregate, and that in most cases it's been meant, and as I just sort of outlined here, to create racial inequality. And so how do you undo racial inequality? You have to be able to address the fact that racial inequality exists. And that's why colorblindness is the incredible ideal at the horizon. This is what I'm writing about in the last sentence of the book. Not to give it away for all of you who haven't read the book yet, but this is the horizon that I'm talking about, right? This is the ideal that we're all trying to get to, right? Where we can be seen in our full humanity, and we can, and where our debts to each other are acknowledged, right? Where the harms that have been done to each other are acknowledged, harms that reverberate down through the generations. And so I think colorblindness is this horizon that keeps on retreating before us. And I think that the way that we get there is to be able to address this, to talk about it, to be able to put it out as the factual reality that we deal with in this society. Thanks for your question.
Hi, my name is Hannah. My question is, we've been having a lot of discussions in our classes about author purpose and rhetoric and the decisions that you make and how they affect the reader. And I assume that you had some reasoning behind ordering your essays the specific way you did, and I was wondering if you could just elaborate on that a little bit.
Thanks for the question. So the essays were kind of meant to kind of scaffold us towards the end, towards kind of understanding the ways in which we can actually come together around these questions. And so people call the book really pessimistic. I think in a lot of ways it's meant to be really realistic. And yet to also, in the spirit of Kendrick's song, to try to find a way to see through the difficulties towards some sorts of solutions. And so that's why the Beyonce chapter's at the end. It's a leap. It's the leap that we all kind of have to make together to be able to get to this kind of world that can be quote-unquote post-racial, in which we can be seen in our full humanity. And so the essays kind of proceed as a way of building up to this argument. The heart of the book, of course, are the two chapters that I had written after visiting Ferguson, after being in Ferguson for several days there, bearing witness to the movement there. And so those are the two chapters, Vanilla Cities and Their Chocolate Suburbs and Hands Up. And the essay, The In-Betweens, came along because my editor challenged me. She said, you know, you need to kind of put something of yourself in this. And I had to address my own positionality as an Asian and Pacific Islander, somebody who's of Chinese and Native Hawaiian descent, and acknowledge my own debts to Black freedom culture, to the Black freedom movement, to the movement for Black lives, and to be able to state that up front. And at the same time, to be able to unpack what it means to hold privilege and what our responsibilities are in that regard. To be able to, again, recognize the kind of debts that I owe in terms of my intellectual formation and my social activist formation. And so the book kind of proceeds in a way to get to something of a hopeful ending, I hope. Something that we still have to imagine. I don't know what it looks like in terms of policy. I know some of the things that might work, but I also don't think that my generation is going to be the generation to pull us through this. I think you all are going to be that generation.
India Card asks, why do you think the Black Lives Matter movement is sometimes seen as negative and violent instead of what their actual mission is?
I think it's part of the process of demonizing social movements that threaten people in power. And so it's happened to every social movement in the US. But there's a particular kind of cast to it because of the central way in which this country has been founded on segregation and racial inequality, particularly around blacks, around African Americans, and around indigenous people, around Native Americans. And so I think that, you know, that's pretty much what's happening here. And I think that that's what gets distorted, you know, in this particular process. That we have to recognize that these issues are not about one over the other. It's not about class over race. It's not about gender over class. It's not about you know, sexuality over race or class or any of that other kind of stuff. That all of these things intersect in very complicated types of ways. And so when we look to the folks who are most affected, the folks who are feeling the harm or have felt the harm historically the most, those folks are proposing solutions that reflect all of these embedded isms. And what we see is that it's very easy for elites to divide people in that regard. And so the demonization of the movement for Black Lives has to do with the fact that the movement for Black Lives is proposing solutions that would improve not just the lives of African Americans, but the lives of whites, the lives of Latinos, the lives of Asian Americans, the lives of Pacific Islanders. That's a direct threat. And I think ultimately we have to be able to see through that. We have to see past that. And the Women's March has been a great example of that. The work that folks have been doing around the Dreamers movement has been able to show intersectionality, and certainly the Movement for Black Lives agenda, the platform, is probably one of the most progressive agendas we've seen in a very, very long time. So, thank you.
Hi, my name is Jay, and I really, really, really appreciate your book and everything that you said tonight. And I'm just so happy and so excited to be able to have the chance to see you speak. But I kind of wanted to ask how you feel about the concept of safe spaces, especially for minorities and people of color, as we're bombarded by images and rhetoric that devalue us as humans, and we're expected to have these conversations and educate people who don't experience these things, and it takes a real toll on mental health, and how these safe spaces that we can create can seem kind of as though we're segregating and separating people, but it's a necessary thing in order to kind of regroup and recope. So I just wanted to know how your thoughts on that.
Thank you. So, you know, the idea of safe space, we all have our safe spaces, right? We have our core friends that we go and enjoy different types of things with. Maybe we like certain kinds of food. We go to different types of movies. We have different kinds of experiences that we can share together. And those are safe spaces. What I think is really interesting is how folks have come to regard safe spaces, this notion of safe spaces, as something in which there is nothing going on but sort of commiseration and people sort of saying a set of words and then repeating it back to each other, as if there's no critical thinking or if there's no sort of living and growing that's happening in quote-unquote safe spaces. Again, we all have different identities. We create our own safe spaces in order to be able to get through life. And for folks to want to be able to get together to share certain kinds of feelings, experiences, and those kinds of things, I don't understand what the whole furor over it is. There needs to be a way in which people are able to find their spaces of freedom. And I want to emphasize that in some ways the word safe spaces doesn't actually capture all of the stuff that's happening there, right? And it's easily demonized and it's easily sort of caricatured. But these are places where folks can relax and dream again. And in that sense, they're really, really crucial to our lives. And I mean that for everyone, right? I think that there needs to be, listen, the race conversation is so difficult. Multiculturalism taught us the words that we can't say to each other, but we haven't figured out the language to be able to speak to each other yet. That's what we're trying to figure out. That's what your generation is tasked and charged with figuring out. There need to be safe spaces, quote unquote safe spaces, for everyone to be able to do that, right? To not have to feel like if I say something in here, I might make a mistake and everybody's going to look at me as a racist, or everybody's going to look at me as a sexist, or a homophobe, or whatever, right? So everybody needs these kinds of places to be able to work it out, right? And then we all kind of come back together. There's different spaces where we overlap with each other. So we all have multiple spaces where we express and grow and develop our identity. And that's, I think, crucial at this particular point. I just think the whole debate has been hijacked by people who don't really take common sense to kind of understand what it actually means. So, yeah.
Hi. Hello.
Oh, hi.
My name is Yasmin, and I'm studying political science here. And I'm also born and raised in the Silicon Valley Bay Area over in California.
Okay.
So as amazing as this experience has been growing up in the Bay Area, terms like gentrification are terms that I'm very familiar with just because my friends, family, neighbors have been affected by rising rent, homelessness epidemics such as one that is occurring in San Francisco today, and cities alike. And I just wanted to really know, because in Vanilla Cities and Chocolate Suburbs, you touch on this in the first few pages, writing or quoting sentences such as, "The city loves to preserve its murals and evict its muralists." I found this amazing because it's something that I'm actually interested in solving. So I wanted to know exactly what the solution is, because as you can see, states like Utah have a universal housing program for the homeless, which has actually decreased homelessness by 91%. Should we be doing this in areas like San Francisco? And how do we eliminate the running joke of how Google employees can't even afford to live in the area as well? So I was wondering what your take was.
Yeah, it's a very complicated, multi-layered question. And it's going to require work happening on a multiple of different levels, from local municipalities to state government, and in between regional types of bodies, right? When we look at resegregation here in the district, in the Beltway, or we look at resegregation in the Bay Area, this is a multi-city type of issue. If people can't afford San Francisco, they move to Oakland. In Oakland, the rent has become, Oakland's become the 5th hottest rental market in the country. So people can't afford Oakland, they have to move to Antioch. They have to move further out into the Bay. And it's the same type of situation. It's the same domino effect that kind of happens out here in the Beltway as well. And so these are things that people have to come together on multiple levels to be able to resolve. Different types of cities have been experimenting with different types of policies. Vancouver now tries to prohibit housing speculation by greatly taxing people's purchase of second homes. And there's other types of ways in which cities have established increased ways of speeding up the process of building affordable housing. But I don't want to minimize the kinds of political issues that are involved here, right? At the same time that this is going on, there's a lot of anti-development forces that are at work as well. And there's a lot of environmental concerns that are happening as well. What we do need to do is to state broadly, this is an issue. This is a problem. This is something that we need to be able to devote our time, our energy, our resources, our best thinking to being able to resolve. And what's happened globally is that the market has moved unchecked and created a situation in which there's decreasing amounts of affordable housing and an increase on the high end that furthers inequality, that furthers the decimation of neighborhoods, that tears apart our communities, and that ultimately functions to create more segregation in our lives.
Just
thank you.
We've got time for 2 more questions, and in deference to people who are here, then I think what we'll do is we'll take the last one from the back section with Professor Chautka, and then I'll take one last one down here, and that will be it.
All right. My question is a bit long, and it is 2-part, honestly.
Where are you, sir? I don't.
Right over
oh,
here.
I see you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
So during the initial civil rights movement, there was a strong support from the labor movement, especially with the UAW under Walter Reuther. But given the fact that now there has been a substantial right-wing effort to destroy unions, including the recent piece in The Guardian about the State Policy Network and their efforts to pass more right-to-freeload laws all across America, how do we survive and make sure that we can fight back effectively without those kind of resources that we had the first round?
Whew. Yeah. Can I punt this question? The first time I actually came to Washington, D.C. was to intern with the labor union here. It was the beginning of the Justice for Janitors campaign here. And this sort of new idea back then that the most important folks to organize were the unorganized, very low-wage workers in the service economy. Justice for Janitors now, of course, is a big national, international, union and project. And new efforts have been floated to organize people who are not thought of as being part of the formal labor sector. So organizing people like domestic workers, for instance. And so I think that there are these very sort of deep-seated issues that go directly to the ways in which labor has changed in the U.S., globally, and the ways in which people have become more and more disenfranchised. It's common now, it's usual for people to expect that those working in Silicon Valley should be there all day and all night. And that's why you have a commissary that's stocked 24 hours a day and a gym room that's open 24 hours a day as well. This has become part of our culture. And so I think at this particular point, there need to be continued efforts on the ground to be able to fight and support and defend labor unions. But there also needs to be a cultural shift. There needs to be a point at which we say, we can't give our entire lives, our entire waking moments to the machine. That we have to be able to figure out a way to make that work-life balance that gets so talked about all the time a reality, a real thing. And that's part of the massive cultural shift that needs to be made overall in the world at this particular point. That was a difficult question, one I've never gotten before. Thank you.
This will be the last question of the evening.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Anna Greatzer, and I'm a student at the School of International Service. I really appreciate you taking the time to come out and speak with us.
Thank you.
I apologize if this is a bit of a digression, but throughout the night you've mentioned that our generation needs to do a good job of active listening and really listening to other perspectives. And I was wondering if you have a recommendation of how we could balance listening to more conservative perspectives while still staying true to our morals and our ethics, if there's like a balance that you have found.
I don't think that I posed ethics against conservatism, did I? I didn't. If I did, I really didn't mean to, right? I think that values and sort of ideologies are different things, and I think that you know, this is a process in which we all have to rededicate ourselves to each other. So we should be thinking about community founded on openness, founded on inclusion, founded on opportunity, founded on access, founded on the restoration of justice and equity, right? I think that there's a way to argue that those are conservative values, actually, right? One of the things that I was really stunned to find when I went to Ferguson was that people weren't talking about ideology. People were talking about what it really meant to be doing the work that they were doing. That there was a very deep spiritual undercurrent to what it was that folks thought that they were doing. That there was a sense that if you, whatever sort of religion you subscribe to, or if you didn't subscribe to religion, that this was something deeply human that people were doing. And that requires people to be able to imagine beyond the current boxes that we're in. The red state, blue state stuff, the party stuff, all of those kinds of things, and to go to the heart of what it is that we need to be doing to make this country whole in the same ways that we're trying to make ourselves whole at the same time, right? And so in that regard, you know, I think that we have to be able to say that ideology is not enough for us, that it's not going to get us there, right? That we need to be able to figure out new ways of working together that maybe haven't been tried, or maybe haven't been tried in centuries, and that's the basis of trying to getting us back into balance with each other. Thanks for the question. Thanks, you all, for staying. I really appreciate you. Really, really appreciate you.